Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chris Macpherson Show. We are into episode 24, and we're going to get straight into things. No rant from me this week. We'll save that and wind me up next week and see how we go. But it is a huge week of sport. We're going to have to get into the around the grounds, and who better to join me as we cover off a number of sports and starting off with a bit of cricket than Brody Burrows from the Third Man Up podcast. Welcome back, mate. And it's not quite a raise the bat, but you've hit double digits today on the show. Welcome.
Oh, thanks very much, mate. First time in about 5 seasons I've hit double digits with anything, so I'll definitely claim it being on a podcast.
Yeah, look, plenty of my seasons were double digits, but it was missed tackles, clean bowled, goals conceded, anything else you want to go with. But hey, speaking of sport and all those sports, there is heaps to get into at the moment. There's lots of things that have been dropping, especially in the days leading up to this record. We've touched on the cricket a little bit. The Sheffield Shield final, it will be kicking off. It will be mid-game by the time this gets underway, but your South Australians, mate, we talked at length last week about the challenges around the Saka and their booking schedule, but they're in the final. They've got a chance to break a big drought up against the Queenslanders. Pretty much every other state doesn't like Queensland, so I feel like it's the rest of the country versus South Australia. It's like those old graphics you used to see when New England Patriots were playing in a Super Bowl. It'd be like, who's supporting New England? It'd be a small dot on Boston and the rest of America supporting whoever they're playing.
Yeah, it's very similar to that, but I think you're also saying that as a New South Welshman at the same time, mate. Definitely with your heart on your sleeve there. But yeah, look, it's going to be interesting. Obviously, a fair bit's sort of happened in the Queensland camp over the past week. We saw Uzi come out and all the controversy that sort of surrounded that. But it's time for cricket now, obviously being played at Karen Rolton Oval. And look, Nathan McSweeney, former Queenslander himself, captaining the South Australian side. So plenty from both teams going into this one. Fingers crossed the SA boys can get it done. I know I'll be tuning into every ball that I can of this one.
Well, one thing we know, mate, New South Wales have been a dominant side when we look at the history of Sheffield Shield. You talked about New South Wales, but there's New South Welshmen floating around on both sides. But one that I'm particularly interested in is Newcastle's own Jason Sanger, and mate, he's been in a bit of form lately. So I reckon he's a cheeky, sneaky look for leading the way here with the bat. He's been in good nick.
Yeah, he has been. And not just that, but I think it's probably exactly what Jason Sanger needed, this move to South Australia as well. Getting regular games, because we know and we've seen the talent that he's had for so long. So really looking forward to see not just what he does in this game, but I think the next 12 months could be crucial for him, and hopefully he can push for even higher honours over the next 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, he certainly can. He's still quite young. He's the prodigy, and we'll see where that shapes from there. Moving on, and when we talk about grounds, there's been some big grounds news today, and I feel like we need to call in our resident Queenslander to talk about Brisbane 2032. There he is, right on cue. He's like Voldemort. You mentioned him in his ears. JR, welcome back, mate.
That's a weird drive-by. Like, what was that? Anyway, big news out of Brisbane today. Brisbane 2032 Olympic Games venues have been announced, with a new Victoria Park Stadium been announced, along with a slew of venue upgrades. Confirming in the last couple of minutes that the Brisbane Showgrounds will actually be where the Athletes Village will be located for this Games.
Well, yeah, it's interesting when you look at this. As you said, a 63,000 seat stadium to be built at Victoria Park, just about a kilometre out of the city, accessible by existing public transport, which will probably get upgraded. But David Crisafulli unveiled the plans today. We've had a 100-day independent review. We've been through all sorts of rigmarole, Brody. Politics getting involved in sport. Who would have thought that had happened? But it's interesting because he promised before the 2024 state election that they wouldn't build a new stadium. Again, politicians backflipping. Who would have thought? But to your point, JR, there's going to be 3 athletes' villages, I understand. There's going to be one at the Gold Coast, one at Maroochydore, and one there at the Showgrounds, which, again, we haven't had this exactly confirmed, but we've done a bit of very, very amateur sleuthing. I'll be amplifying the very, very on that and amateur. But it looks like it may be in the golf course grounds. There might be the likely spot in Victoria Park. It looks like the only significant open space with the Showgrounds next to it. But this is a huge change, I guess, JR, too. And, there's also been some other announcements about the swimming and a few other events. And this isn't going to be the Brisbane Olympics. This is going to be the Queensland Olympics. We're going to have things in Toowoomba, in Cairns, in Maryborough, all around.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway I've got from this is the Queensland government actually taking the fact that the Gabba has passed its use-by date as a ground. Like, if they were to have built, like, it does sort of boggle my mind slightly that they decided to go for Victoria Park and not knock down and rebuild the Gabba, like, because that's an iconic ground, having like a rebuilt one there. And like that precinct's already got all its existing infrastructure. The good thing about Victoria Park that we touched on before is Roma Street Station is one stop away. Like, it is right in the heart of the Brisbane transport system. So it's got everything it needs to be a place where the public can get to really easily.
It certainly does. And, it's interesting seeing what they've come out with. I think the reasoning for that personally would be that they don't want Brisbane to be without a stadium operationally for a year or two. Like we can see at the moment with the Rugby League, Penrith have to play at Parramatta for 2 years because their stadium's being rebuilt. So they build Victoria Park, then bowl the Gabba, turn that into urban renewal. But the interesting line, because, there was a lot of stuff talked about with Paris's brand new stadium that they did for, the upgrades that they did for the Paris Olympics. LA's got the Coliseum. But then Chris Afouli's come out and said, we're not Paris, we're not LA, this will be better, it'll be the Queensland way, and that will be what makes the games great. And I'm like, hang on, you've done exactly what everyone else is doing, and then you're trying to say, no, but we're different. So, again, politicians spinning things, politicians in sport, politician backflipping. I believe that is major sporting event bingo, Broads.
Mate, who would have thought, hey? But yeah, it's a very bold call coming out saying it's going to be bigger and better than the LA Olympics. I think we're going to see some absolutely wild stadiums and setups over there. So that's going to be a very bold call. But look, I look at this, obviously Gabba getting demolished, but there's one sport that's going to be played in this Olympics, the cricket. Imagine the swan song of the Gabba being a gold medal to Australia. I mean, that is just the ultimate cherry on top of probably the best way for the Gabba to go out, isn't it?
Well, I think that's a great idea there too, Brody. Like, why not use the Gabba for that cricket stuff? Like, It's a specialised stadium. Like, the AFL plays there, and Lions are the regular sort of tenant there as well. But yeah, have that as the Gabba's swan song. Absolutely.
I like it. I think the cricket will probably be shared between a couple of venues just because of how much time and space cricket needs even at a T20 level, right? So, certainly interesting. Other sports will benefit as well. To that point, there'll be a 20,000-seat arena at the showgrounds alongside this core athletes village, 3,000-seat show court at the Queensland Tennis Centre and 12 match courts. As I said, the pool and indoor arena at Sleeman Centre for parasport. Most of the things have been upgraded. Brisbane Arena, the clear loser in this one because they've said it won't be upgraded. But they have committed to keeping it within the $7.1 billion budget that was initially set down. But I believe this main stadium is going to cost them 6.3. So quick maths, that doesn't leave a whole lot of change.
Well,
Definitely not.
That's a lot on one sort of part of their infrastructure. So yeah, look, I can see a Queensland government cost blowout coming our way.
Absolutely.
It'll be a great games. I very much doubt that we'll have the same government still in Queensland. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is. There's lots of people, as much as our viewers and us care very much about sports and how wonderful they are for what we do. There's lots of people that have got other focuses. And look, I don't, want to make light of how challenging a job it is running any area, even the size, especially the size of a state or a nation. But yeah, they're going to, as many people as will be giving them the, an absolute pat on the back for this will be as many people as trying to snipe them from the long grass.
Yeah, look, we've seen that in South Australia as well. Same as very similar to Peter Malinauskas and what he's brought to South Australia. Mally trying to bring every sport that he possibly can to South Australia, and there is a lot of pushback from the people who, in the same boat. They like sport, but they would also like the resources invested differently. But at the same time, the amount of money that that Gather Round Live Golf has brought to the South Australian economy, let's hope Queensland get just as much back if it's possible.
Yeah, well, hopefully it drives lots of money into the economy, as we said, and hopefully these venues, they've got lifespans of 30 plus years, so it sets Queensland up and Brisbane up most notably. Even some of those other regions, to be fair, in Queensland, they'll have some investment as well. Well into the 2060s, which I don't know about you guys, but I feel like that is going to be the end of my lifespan. So these will be the stadiums I'm going to be using for the foreseeable future and probably the rest of our lives.
Exactly.
All right, well, let's move on to the NBL, Broads. JR is going to sneak back into the background, and this was the weird grand final series. We had Robbo on a couple of times. He was, I think he's still celebrating, so I don't know if we could have got him today. But 4 games 1 through 4. The home side faded late, lost the game in the third and fourth quarters. You just couldn't believe that there was going to be a story written that all 5 games would be one away from home, and it certainly wasn't the case. The Illawarra Hawks ended up winning 114 to 104. They did the job in the second quarter. They got a 10-point lead, and then the third and fourth quarters were both level. They held on to that 10-point lead to win 114 to 104, despite the fact they were down a couple of their key stars. Trey Kell stood up 26 points to lead the way. Will Hickey with 21 as well. And, to do that down players and up against it is a huge effort for the Hawks.
It is. I'd love to know, not just here, but first time in any deciding series, with obviously the championship on the line, where away wins all the time. I think you'd have to go back in any major league, the first time in a long time. And like you said, up against it, but weird things happen in finals. No matter what sport you play, weird things happen. And it's not... You often find it's not your best players that produce come final time. It's your fifth in basketball. It's your fifth and sixth and seventh players that will actually bring you home a ring. And it's similar to rugby. It's usually your bench players, or in Aussie rules, it's your bottom six players. And you know what you're going to get from your superstars usually when it comes to finals. But it's the ones who play defense and will play really hard defense. Once a game gets tight, that's what happens. And that's exactly what happened here. And well done. Backs against the wall. It's a championship that you can say was well deserved from start to finish.
Yeah, you certainly can. And, Illawarra, hard to believe they had one of their worst seasons in their history only 2 seasons ago. To then, I guess, come back and turn it around in 2 years under Tatum has been a huge thing. So well done. Hats off to Illawarra. I love to see it from a New South Wales point of view. I hate to see it as a Sydney Kings fan, but I also love seeing Melbourne United not win. So I'm very much torn and in a position of conflict, Broads. I don't know where to go. It'd probably be, a bit like you if the other side of South Australia managed to take home a flag this year, which I don't think we'll see happen.
No, definitely not. Don't think so. But also big news, Bryce Cotton departing the Wildcats soon, mate. Obviously, we know the superstar that he is. What's he going to do next? He hasn't come out and announced it. So that's going to be a huge watch over the next couple of weeks.
It will be expected that he's going to go to Japan. Melbourne United was one of the other destinations, but it sounds like they haven't tabled an offer. He came out on social media this week to say that he's departing. Absolutely phenomenal. 5-time MVP, pretty much every honour. He'll go down alongside Andrew Gaze as one of the greatest to ever play the game domestically here in Australia. He's adopted as one of our own now. He's dashed off already since the season finished to get some extra game time in Puerto Rico and make sure he's looking after himself financially, which is great to see. The one thing I do want to touch on, just back to the grand final, Bros, I don't know if you caught this. Matty Dellavedova, former NBA star, MVP trophy, got given the series MVP trophy and just said, look, I don't feel I deserve this, and handed over to Will Hickey, who was an absolute star for Illawarra. I touched on it just before. He was their second highest scorer in this game, the big man. It didn't go down well because it was at Wollongong when he announced Dellavedova. Look, Delly's played phenomenally since he's come back to the NBL, but I think that just talks to the kind of guy he is too.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of commentary around about this, and it had to go to Hickey. Like, anyone that watched this, it's just simply had to go to Hickey, and Delly being Delly, I mean, it was never in doubt. Delly knew that he didn't deserve it at the same time. But I love what Delly has brought to the league. The same way he played his NBA career, you see a lot of people, they go over to the NBA and they come back and then they try and take over a team. Delly's played the exact same way when he was on the Cavs as what he has when he's come back. And you love to see that for the NBL, with a strong defense, but also the ability to distribute on the offense as well. And great series by Delly, but I think it was the right call.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, let's move from domestic basketball and head over to the US, to the NBA. And have we seen some signs, mate? Ben Simmons might finally be back. He's lit up, combination with James Harden. He came in a little bit later in the game for the Clippers, but I think this is probably the first green shoots we've seen from someone who is so highly touted and has been, look, I think it's fair to say, so much of an emotional roller coaster. I don't think there's been someone so maligned in Aussie sport outside of Nick Kyrgios over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. Irrespective of what you might think of him personally, I think it's good for Australian basketball, and it's probably good for him personally if he can get back to even a shadow of his best.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's good for him personally, and it's one of those things with Ben Simmons is, we get excited about him because his talent coming in, and we obviously know he's just a defensive beast out there on the court. And a lot of people look at his stats and say, he played 27 minutes and he didn't even get a double-double, and that's not his game. He's there to lock players down, and probably since his first or second season, he hasn't been that double-double or triple-double threat. He hasn't been in the right mindset. He's playing, 10, 15 games a year at best for the last 3 or 4 years, and it's good signs but I'm very hesitant to say Ben Simmons is back at this stage. We've seen it before. He gets, that 5 or 6 game really good run, which he even did at the Nets. And fingers crossed he can stay on the right path. As an Australian, very similar. You love him, you hate him. We want to see him do well. We have to see him do well. And who knows, maybe a few years' time, 2032, if you're still kicking, he should be fresh, mate. Let's put it that way.
He certainly should be, mate. Look, if things are pointing in the right direction for the Aussies, we know that. Quickly, I'm just going to give a shout out to Dyson Daniels as well, who had
great barrier thief.
Great barrier thief. One of the great nicknames. He set the record. He's the first player, the youngest player to record 200 steals since 1973-74. Remembering also that there's still about 10 games left in the season in the NBA, so just absolutely rocking it up. 202 steals and counting, the most in any season in the last 16 since Chris Paul in 2008-09. The Great Barrier Thief, one of the great names. Someone's got a little bit too much time on their hands. We won't talk about the fact that he missed a clear open slam dunk, but that's okay. He's there to steal the ball, not to finish it. But yeah, great to see Dyson Daniels and the Aussies continuing to tear it up in the NBA, mate.
Yeah, look, I think one thing about Dyson Daniels is his steals come early in the game when it's hot as well. How many times he gets to steal in the first 1 or 2 minutes of a game is absolutely, it's unbelievable. You can nearly pencil it in if there was a market for that. I mean, you'd have a crack. But Dyson Daniels, and we're seeing a lot of this with Australian basketballers coming in, European basketballers coming in. It's a completely different game to growing up playing college. They're here, they're playing serious defense in the NBL, in the Europe leagues, and that's why it transcends really well to international basketball as well. So I think Dyson Daniels, doing unbelievable things, and I can't wait to see him back in the green and gold, whenever that may be.
Yeah, certainly. We'd love to think he's a bit of a shout of the Defensive Player of the Year, but we know that steals aren't always the main thing they look at there. I think he's a long shot. I know that Steve Kerr gave him a bit of a praise after the game, but yeah, I think we'll be surprised if that happened, but it'd be great to see. But mate, we might take a bit of a spell. I've got a few people to get into to get some other segments, and we might come back and chat some AFL, mate, a little bit later in the show, hey?
Sounds good, mate.
Well, we sent Brody back to the change rooms to get a breather, so it's time to get into the motorsport to get the show proper started, and we'll bring back the man behind the ones and the twos. He's our resident Maroon, our resident Brisbane expert, and the resident guru on motorsport. JR, you're back, and it's time to talk F1. It's only race 2, but there's already controversy, drama, and everything else in F1.
Look, it's been a spectacular start to the F1 season with a wet race in Melbourne, and now hints of rain towards the end of China. But a result that all Australia can be happy with Oscar Piastri getting his first win of the season, leading more or less from start to finish on a good tyre strategy, looked after his tyres. Lando insisted he was faster and he should be allowed to get a little bit closer to him, and that just was never going to happen. Lando, for the record, was not faster. It's just all in his head. He needs to learn how to just control his radio button. Maybe stop the inner monologue coming through his radio might be an idea. The big news from the weekend was disqualifications of Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, and Pierre Gasly. Multiple reasons. Lewis had a plank variance where his plank was worn too far. This may come into some of the reasoning behind why he was so dominant in the sprint race and then just was nowhere in the actual main race, where they might have got the car set up perfectly to have the right height at a certain height, during the sprint when it's lower on fuel. But for the race, they had more wear on the floor than what was actually necessary.
Yeah, so for those who aren't as familiar with F1, the plank or the skid block, it's essentially a mandatory attachment now to the underside of the car. It's something that's been used in F1 for decades now. It's used in a number of other categories as well. It basically just gives a minimum ground clearance, which basically is around enhancing the handling, as I understand it.
That's right, yeah. So, and then as for Charles Leclerc and Pierre Gasly, they were disqualified due to weight variations, so they were underweight what they should have been for the end of the race. Charles Leclerc's front wing didn't come into account for that. That's something that's handled separately. But in terms of his overall fuel load, that's probably where it came down to, where he may not have been fueled up as much as what he could have been. Again, showing why he was probably faster than Lewis during a lot of the phases of the race, where Lewis, again, really dominant in the sprint.
Yeah, it's a little disappointing. And again, just for those that are, I guess, train spotting a little bit here. An 800 kilo weight, which is the minimum weight of the car, including the driver, excluding fuel, which was the threshold that they met underneath. Generally, the driver weight is allowed to be up to 82 kilos. So we know the training and everything that goes into that, JR. So interestingly enough, just as a side note, that will reduce by another 32 kilos next year.
That's going to be a much smaller car, though. We are seeing these absolute tanks of vehicles, which why certain races like Monaco became so what's the word I'm looking for? Procession, where overtaking, just because there's not enough space on the track to put two cars side by side. It's getting a little ridiculous. So the overall reduction in size is probably a good thing, really. Yeah,
it certainly is. And normally, obviously, if teams knew that they were likely to be underweight, they will. And we were talking about this before we recorded. They'll use ballast, similar to what they would use in a boat, etc. But obviously, they trickled underneath these guys, and FIA are not taking any light measures with it this year.
Yeah. Speaking of reductions in size, let's talk about what's happening over at Red Bull. There's a lot of conjecture going on right now, and we do believe the size of their driver is going to reduce. Currently, they are going with driver most likely to say he's the fastest man in Formula One, but then also qualify in 20th, Liam Lawson. He is looking more and more likely to be replaced by a much smaller driver in Yuki Tsunoda, who's finally going to get a crack at that Red Bull after all these years.
Well, it's a nice little tie-in in timing, isn't it? It just, coincidental. It looks like it's going to happen in the. Again, we've got a 2-week break between races at the moment. We know that we've got to go back to back, and then we'll have a 2-week for most of the cycle of the season. But ahead of the Japanese Grand Prix, is that? Do you think that's a bit of smarts there from the Red Bull team in terms of their alignment? They're taking a bit of opportunity for marketing and hopefully some good press.
Look, I'd say that they'll absolutely take the opportunity for the marketing. As for the timing, it's just a pure coincidence. It's one thing to have a driver sort of just struggling at the back end of the top 10. Where Sergio probably was at the start of last year, but this is worse results than we've seen out of Perez at the end of the last season. So suddenly, they've spent all that money getting rid of Checo to have someone that's even worse than Checo. This is not a result for Red Bull. We should point out that these are unconfirmed reports at this stage. Red Bull has not put out any statements, but multiple media sources have begun reporting on this story. So I would imagine by the time we go to air, we're going to have an answer one way or the other what's happening in Japan.
Yeah, it appears to be very close to when we drop this episode, the formal news, if it does happen. There's been some other conversations around it. That's been the most reported piece. But there's also been conversations around a meeting with Colapinto as well. So there could be some reshuffling of the deck chairs in F1, which might turn out all right for Aussies, which is ironic considering that the emergence of Liam Lawson was bad news for Aussies originally.
That's right. Jack Doohan could dodge a bullet in all of this. He could be the real winner in this, in that he gets to not so much 100% retain his seat, but the most dangerous thing to that seat for him may be taken off the board for him, which is great.
Yeah, it's certainly be interesting to see. While we speak of Jack Doohan, he did also pick up 2 demerit points in each of the races. He didn't doing it once wasn't enough. He did it on Saturday and Sunday for racing incidents. So that means that he is carrying 4 demerit points. If you get 12 demerit points in a 12-month period, you will. The FIA has the right to suspend you for a race. So yeah, that'll be interesting.
I believe New South Wales government has a pretty similar rule to that, actually, Chris.
Yeah, well, I think lots of racing, lots of. Oh, hang on, no, I shouldn't be driving my car as a race car. That's where I was going wrong. Never mind. But look, yeah, there's lots happening. We will be back next week talking F1 JR as we lead into the Japanese Grand Prix. We'll know a lot more. Yeah, I'm certainly excited. It's one of my favourite races on the calendar, so a bit of drama and intrigue as we head into it. But we know Suzuka can throw up some wild weather anyway, but we'll talk a bit more about that.
No worries, Chris. Thank you.
Well, it's time to move on from the F1 and it's time to head to the Rugby League paddock, and we've scoured the globe to try and find ourselves a Rugby League aficionado worth digging into it with, and we've got Rugby League trader and guru Matt Willoughby. Matt, welcome to the Chris Macpherson Show.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. Let's discuss some NRL, hey, the greatest game of all.
Greatest game of all, correct, mate? So Peter Volandi's overseeing it. There's always some drama, and it's wonderful that we're at round 4 and we're already seeing contract dramas spilling out. We saw Dylan Brown the other week going to the Knights. Now Daly Cherry Evans has come out and said that he won't be at Manly next year.
Yeah, it's a real strange one, this, isn't it? I was sitting last night just, getting dinner ready and watching NRL 360, and to be honest, it was a pretty boring episode. But then they had some breaking news that Daly Cherry Evans had decided he wasn't going to be playing at Manly next year. I'm not sure why it needed to be done publicly like that. They've had such a great start to the season. They look like, they could be a contender. It really is a bit of a head scratcher. And then sort of later in the night, watching Channel 9, and there he is on the panel discussing the fact that he's not going to be at the club next year, and it's sort of really, really, really weird. And the explanation he gave was something along the lines of he'd had chats with a couple of clubs and none of them had made him an offer, but Manly hadn't made him an offer either, so he wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he wasn't going to be at Manly. That's about the most I made of it. What about you, Chris?
It's a bizarre one. It doesn't really seem to have much rhyme or reason. As you say, it's kind of no one offered me anything, but Manly didn't either, so I'm not going to be at Manly. I would have thought that would have been more reason to stay at your club, but it's going to be interesting now. There's probably, realistically, I'm sure there's a lot of clubs that would like to sign him. There's a few we can probably put a line through. The Knights are one of those because if they sign him, they'll only be able to field 3 players on the field at any one time, which will be KP, Dylan Brown and him.
I've heard some... you hear the names that have come around, which is obviously the Dolphins being the first one. DCE's been at Manly and he's been living on the Northern Beaches for so long now. His family's obviously there. He's got, I'm pretty sure he's got daughters who would be in high school, if not close. And as much as that's his boyhood club, I find it would be a strange decision for him to go back there. A bloke in his capacity with maybe 2 good seasons left, thinking about someone like Cooper Cronk, you're looking to go and sign a contract at a team that can win a comp. And I can't really see the Dolphins being in a position to worry the premiership in the next 2 years. So that's one that I would think would be a bit of a shock to me.
Yeah, I think there's been about half a dozen, I think, that have sort of popped their head up initially. As I said, I think realistically, there's probably at least a dozen clubs that are trying to move it around and work out if there's a way they can fit Daly Cherry Evans in without either offending their current halfback or breaking the salary cap. But I had sort of a similar thought. He's pretty entrenched in Sydney now, and so the obvious ones, whenever it comes to spending money, comes to the Roosters. The Dragons have got a little bit of cap, and obviously the Eels now have got some room as well. But the Bulldogs is the one that sort of intrigued me. It feels like a really good halfback might be the missing piece there for Cameron Ciraldo.
Yeah, I agree with that there. I think I think the Bulldogs is something that would definitely be on his radar. A well-coached, great defensive team. Their halfback at the moment is going well, but he's not under contract next year anyway. And Gus could probably sort out the money. So I think the Dogs would definitely be something that he'd be interested in, because you could really see them making a run at the title in the next couple of years. The Dragons, yeah, I hear that thrown around, but I just don't know if he wants to go and struggle there for a couple of years. The Roosters, I think, is a definite chance because Nick can pull the strings. And the funny one I did hear this yesterday, which the more you think about it could make a bit of sense, is the Panthers. Because he'd definitely be in line to try and win a comp at the Panthers. He could fit in next to Cleary and just help around there. And he would probably be willing to take a bit less money to go and do that. So I thought that was an interesting one.
Yeah, it's certainly not one I considered. It's obviously going to be a salary cap jigsaw for them, but if anyone can make it work, they can make it work there. And again, as you said, he's made plenty of money to this point, so money may not be his only driver. It'll be interesting what that looks like. But and then obviously the dark horse, again, to that point, if he does consider relocating, would be the Titans as well, I think. Again, I don't think he's going to relocate, but that relationship with Des, Kieran Foran, probably likely to move on at the end of this year, might be an interesting one if he did want to move home to Queensland. But as I said, I think there'll be lots of people trying to figure out if they can shuffle their deck of cards to fit him in at the moment. So this will go on for a little bit yet.
And I wouldn't discount him actually staying at Manly for another 2 years either.
Yeah, well, we know that valuable as they were the last one. So we'll wait and see what comes of it. But it's going to be interesting, another piece to hang over all of these clubs as we head forward, for another 20 plus rounds across the season. There'll be lots more of these contract talks. But look, at the end of the day, they say no publicity is bad publicity. So rugby league's on the front and the back page of the paper at the moment, which is never a bad thing for them.
Yeah.
In terms of the competition, we're a few rounds in now. We're starting to get a bit of a pulse check on a number of teams. Across the opening rounds, how have you seen, we can always just look straight at the ladder and, Melbourne Storm sitting on top, wonderful, where they normally are. But who have been the teams that have impressed you in terms of who have been those winners across the opening rounds, not just in terms of the scoreboard?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and the Storm obviously look good, and I think that they'll be a top 4 team without too many worries. I actually think the competition this year, I wouldn't say it's not at a great level, but I'd say it's very even across the board. I'd say it's going to be hard for any team outside of maybe the Storm to win 3 or 4 games in a row because it's just so tight. The 2 teams that I've been impressed with so far that probably weren't expected to be top 4 teams were Newcastle and the Raiders. I actually really like what Newcastle have done. I thought after winning the 2 games, they were probably due a little bit of a fallback last week. And, the fact that they lost 3 key forwards in Thompson, Pierce, Paul, and I can't remember the other back row, but yeah, they had three key forwards out. I think that gives them a bit of a leave pass for the result last week, and I think they'll get back on board. And also, it's tough not to be impressed with what the Raiders have done. They obviously were ready for the game in Vegas, and then they really took care of business well there. But then they've been minus their captain, Joe Tapani, since they've come back. And, I think that they're a top 8 team, which most people probably wouldn't have reckoned prior to the comp.
I'll certainly take that as a Raiders fan, mate. I wasn't necessarily result on the weekend, but I think, with everything that's gone on with Vegas and probably overperforming in the opening rounds, I didn't expect them to knock over the Broncos in week 2, so we're going to accept the blemish. As you said, it's going to be hard for teams to string together wins. Mate, I noticed what you've got on the head there, mate. How are you feeling about the Tigers so far this season?
Oh, look, as you know, I'm a Tigers fan. Even though I'm in Brisbane, I was up at the game on Saturday afternoon, and as a Tigers fan, we don't win many games, so it was awesome to get amongst it and get a win and see the new look team. But I'm a bit hesitant to get too excited just yet with how they're going. But obviously, they lost to the Knights, which are a good team, but they've beaten 2 teams who haven't won a game and are probably closer to the bottom than the top in the Dolphins and Parramatta. I think, the forwards have been going well. Terrell May is a great pickup, and I'm sort of extremely surprised and want to know the full story behind how he left the Roosters, to be honest. But the new look backline, Luai and Lockie haven't quite gelled yet, but I think they will. But my biggest worry with the Tigers is depth in the forwards. I still think we're a couple of injuries away from sort of scraping New South Wales Cup players that probably aren't up to it. So I think that's where we'll get let down in a long season. But obviously, I'm pretty certain they're not going to be getting a 4th spoon in a row.
So no grand final tickets yet, but not quite tissues and tears at this point. That's good to hear.
No, I'll be happy with a mid-table 8th, 9th to 12th or something. But anything more will definitely be a bonus.
Bring back the Tigers finishing 9th tradition. One that's impressed me, Manly, obviously, they were without Turbo on the weekend, had a good, strong win. He's expected to come back in this week, so that'll be good. But you touched on a couple of those teams that haven't won yet. I'm assuming they're the ones that fall into that opening round losers or teams that aren't quite where they want to be at this point.
Yeah, I think it's pretty hard for Parramatta. I'm not sure. I think the Moses injury sort of snuck up on them a fair bit. I'm not sure they were that prepared. Like if they'd had a month to prepare for him not being there, it would have been a bit of a different story. But I think it was a bit of a last-minute thing where they realised how long he was going to be out for. Now, I know he's not making the tackles and he's not, doing all that stuff, but just his kicking game and leadership is going to make a massive difference to that team. So I wouldn't be too worried about Parramatta if he can come back in a reasonable time frame and sort of play 2/3 of the season after that. The Dolphins, I sort of, the Wayne Bennett curse is always hanging over their head, and I just find that they're a bit of an aging side. Their forward pack especially is aging. Obviously, I love the halfback and Hamaso, and Herbie Farnworth can pop up anywhere and are great players, but I worry that they're just not going to be able to sustain a full season with the forwards that they have. So I would suspect that they'll be down the bottom, and I think the Dragons might struggle as well. After the first couple of games, they came out and won. They came out and played the trials like they were finals, and now they've already run out of steam. So I think they're a team that could be, in the bottom two.
And we'll wait and see. Certainly going to be an interesting test for the Dragons this week. They've got the Storm. That's going to be a big measure for them. In terms of the first few rounds we've seen, Matty, what have been the biggest surprises for you? Obviously, one thing that hasn't been a surprise is what we talked about off the top, and that's contract news being in the news from round one. But what has been surprising from what you've seen so far across the season?
Yeah, I think I've really enjoyed the speed of the games. And some teams have really come in prepared for that. I think you spoke about Manly, but also the Sharks, the way they're moving it to the edges and showing some real speed and beating teams on the outside has been a real, it's been real encouraging, and it's really enjoyable to watch. So that's one thing that I've enjoyed. And also, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got a team like the Dogs who are the only team who have won 3 games, and they're just the junkyard dogs of the comp who just want to get you into the back alley and just grind you down. So they're a team that's impressed me. I was surprised that they'd be able to keep it up once they've lost Burton and Kickow, but they have so far. Although they've got a big test this week against the Sharks.
Yeah, that one's certainly going to be an interesting one, and we'll have a look at round 4 in a minute. One that's probably surprised people is where Penrith are sitting on the ladder. If you're a Panthers fan, do you think that that's a negative surprise, or do you just think it's finding them adjusting to life after Luai?
Yeah, I think that they have been around long enough now to know that this is something that's going to happen. It's going to take a while to get into their groove. They've got new players to come in, constantly losing players. I think, whereas in previous years, a top 2 spot would be something that they'd be aiming for. I think Ivan and Nathan, especially Nathan's only probably out for 2 weeks, but I think they're prepared to grind their way into the top 4. So they're not going to start the year as hard as they usually do, but they'll finish it pretty strongly. I certainly wouldn't have any worries about their opportunities to win the comp if I was a supporter.
Certainly a long season ahead. We know that. We know how things shuffle out, and it's about finishing at the right time of year. Let's take a look. Speaking of round 4, teams have dropped. We're looking into the season, and the Panthers kick it off with the Rabbitohs. I guess looking at this, and without going chapter and verse through it, Matty, which games are standing out to you? Which ones are the ones that really piqued the interest?
Well, I actually find this an interesting game, the first game. I know the Souths were disappointing against the Sharks on the weekend, but I still sort of think that, Penrith have changed their team around again. Like Dane Laurie's back and Jenkins has moved into the centres. They've got a new halfback. I wouldn't be surprised if perhaps they didn't win the game, but they kept it nice and close, and it was a pretty competitive game. So for betting purposes, that's certainly a game that I've got my eye on in as much as back in South at some opportunity. The other games, obviously the big game up here on Friday night, Dolphins-Brisbane will be interesting because that line is huge, and if the Broncos play like they have weeks 1 and 3, then they could be in for a long night. The Dolphins. The only saving grace might be that there's going to be some weather up here, so a bit of wet weather might slow the Broncos down a little bit. Other than that, I sort of don't mind the Manly Eels game. I think the Eels will bounce back, and it'll be interesting to see what the fans are like at Manly and how it all interacts with down at Brookie on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, it's obviously a rivalry game at the best of times. It'll be interesting to see the reception that DCE receives there.
I think they'll find it strange and not really know what to do.
I think there'll be a lot of confused Manly fans on that hill there at Brookvale. Yeah, certainly interesting. I think the other ones for the Cowboys, they come up against a Raiders side that's going to be looking for a bit of bounce back, which will be interesting to see. And then the Tigers against the Warriors to bring out the round, which this game always, I know it always throws up some curly things when these two sides come up against each other. Usually it's been the Warriors coming in good form and they either put on a massive score or at Campbelltown, or alternatively the Tigers grab one against the run of play. I feel like that's been the storyline of this. It's either the Tigers in a close one or the Warriors in a blowout when these two come up against each other.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I think I wouldn't be surprised if the Warriors came over here and ambushed the Tigers. To be honest, and I wouldn't be surprised if they put a score on them. As I said, I was at that game on Saturday, and the Tigers' first half was pretty lackluster, and a decent team probably would have been up by 12, if not 18 points at half time. And the Warriors will have a 10-day break to prepare for the game, so I think that they'll be on song, so the Tigers will have to be ready. And there are a few injury concerns for the Tigers from the last week. They've been named, but Skelton and the other guy, just let me scroll down here quickly. Skelton and Fino are both in doubt, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Warriors maybe gave the Tigers a touch-up Sunday night.
Wait, I know RTS out for the Warriors, which is some experience gone for them. But again, if Skelton's out as well, it probably that squares that ledger.
Yeah, they've got Rocco Berry back, who's a pretty good player, and he's been out for the first 3 or 4 games of the season. So they cover that there. The other game you mentioned was the Cows Raiders. That will be a good game. Cows finally showed something last week against the Broncos. So if I was predicting it sort of 10 days ago, I would have said the Raiders comfortably, but now I'm not so sure. It's close in the betting, and I think it'll be a close game.
Yeah, we do. The Raiders do welcome back in Tarpanay, who you touched on. He's been out for a little bit, but then they lose Morgan Smithies, which is probably not quite equal, but it's probably about a square up on the road to Townsville. So either way, it's an interesting round. We're starting to get into the meat and potatoes as we head towards, everyone doing their way too early origin teams and all those fun things that are going to happen shortly. And we'll be talking about that. But Matty, a big thank you to you for coming on. We look forward to getting you on again in a few weeks and digging back into the NRL. But in the meantime, enjoy the footy and thank you again.
No worries. Thanks for having me, and look forward to seeing you again. See you guys.
Well, it's time to move on and head into the round ball action, and there's only one man we look to call on. He's straight off the top of I was going to say the batting order, Lockie, probably not the right. Welcome back, mate. Good to have you on the show again this week, representing Round Ball Australia. And a shout out, I don't think we mentioned it properly last week. You brought up 20 episodes last week, mate.
Oh, thank you. What's the appropriate etiquette for a 20 episode marker? It's not raising the bat or taking the helmet off, is it?
It's a small hand up in the air.
Small little one, thank you.
Don't do a celebration like we saw on Round Ball Australia and throw your cricket bat into the fan. That's bloody English people. They can't be trusted with cricket.
Not at all.
Well, mate, there's been a lot happening. Not as much from an A-League's point of view, but plenty happening. And I thought we might flip things on its head this week. Let's start with the Socceroos. They have, with back-to-back wins, inched ever closer to qualification for the next World Cup. It's not quite there yet, but basically in a position now that one more win should do it. Yeah,
and it's a fascinating window, right? Because you look at the teams like Indonesia and China, and ahead of it, we're all saying, probably should be getting 2 wins from this window. But, we look at the results that we've had earlier in the thing, and then we haven't really had that consistency of just putting performances together to earn results that we, should be earning in quotation marks. So to come out of a window with 6 points for the first time in this phase of qualification is massive. You can see on your screen a pretty good record for Tony Popovic, hasn't lost yet under his tenure. So that's been a massive thing as well. And given how crazy and how competitive this group has been, 2 standard wins actually goes a long way towards putting the Socceroos into the 26 World Cup. So, yeah, really good for the side, and it looks like they're going to get there.
It certainly does. As you say, off to a good role now under Tony Popovic. There were some questions asked. And I think if we look at the Indonesia game, it's probably a really great example of they probably didn't dominate the game as much as the scoreline reflected, but took their opportunities in a really good manner. There's certainly lots of positives. There's lots of questions asked about the makeup of the Indonesian team, and there's been some responses since from the Indonesian fans. But look, 2 wins, as we said, we couldn't have asked for too much more. It also really positively boosted our goal difference, which is a key piece, depending on where we end up with the next game against Saudi Arabia and some of these other games potentially.
Yeah, I'll make an A-League reference for you. Whenever we get Giancarlo Italiano in a post-match press conference and someone says, you didn't have any possession, you didn't have many shots and they were dominating against you, he always likes to challenge different people's assumptions on what they consider dominance in a game of football, right? And yes, the Indonesia game coming to Australia, they had more possession than we did. They pressed really high. This is kind of their new flavour under Patrick Kluivert. But Australia were clinical when they needed to be. They had the higher, opportunity, higher XG chances, and they put them away when they needed to. So they were stunned a little bit in that first 10 minutes. They didn't quite know what to expect, and they were put on the back foot. But after they settled through the game, realised that going centrally through the middle of the park wasn't quite the route that they needed. All of a sudden, the wing backs were getting a lot more involved, and we were bypassing that layer of the field. And it led to a lower possession number, but it led to more effective chances on goal as well. And then being able to convert them away into a 5-1 victory was great. And then going away to China, it was a different proposition. We were expected to hold on to the ball a little bit more. And China mostly sat in this kind of mid-block and allowed us to try and play through them. And that didn't allow us as many chances, but still good for Jackson Irvine and Nishan Philippe to some extent. A bit of a goalkeeper error with that second goal, but to capitalise when needed, and then a little bit of classic popper ball in the second half to lock it out. So I think a really, really convincing, performance from the Socceroos this window.
Positive to see. Hopefully they can continue to build on that. We know how crucial that next window is going to be as we wrap this up. And as we said, when we look at that picture, it's starting to become much clearer in terms of certainly our group, but all of the groups. There's a few teams really 100% out of contention at the bottom end. But, and again, our focus very much on Group C. It's essentially down to 4 teams now in there that can qualify. Indonesia need to do something pretty spectacular in the last window and have a lot of other results go their way, though. So realistically, Australia's game against Saudi Arabia is crucial.
Yeah, 100%. We always kind of thought it was going to be this way between Australia and Saudi Arabia for that second spot. It got a little bit nervy throughout the middle portion of this phase, but we are kind of circling back to that theme. So 3 points advantage plus 9 goals in terms of goal difference on Saudi Arabia. So that's a significant advantage. Theoretically, Saudi Arabia play Bahrain. As long as they win that game in the first of that next window, then they theoretically have a chance. They'd have to beat Australia by about 5 goals if we were to go on and beat Japan as well. But that Saudi Arabia game is key, right? If we get a point there, we will likely go through. And then, if we even manage to beat Japan on home soil the week before, then that would, not mathematically do it, but pretty much sew it up as well. So they've definitely left themselves in a good place.
So just confirming we know it's always a contentious thing. We remember the APL changes a few years ago with the Avil. The count-back mechanism, is it head-to-head results first or goal difference first?
Goal difference.
So that's great news for Socceroos, obviously, because we had a 0-0 draw last time around. So a loss to Saudi Arabia, if it was head-to-head results, would put us in a rough position. So happy days for that. The other thing is we're taking on a Japan team that's already secured their qualification. Do you think that plays into it, or do you think Japan is still going to want to make sure they've got that momentum surging forward?
It possibly could. I think when they show up on match day, whatever players are there and wherever they are, Japan will always do their utmost to win a game of football. That's my belief. I think that's tied to their culture as well. And I don't think they're going to go easy or select light. Maybe in the squad selection phase, it'll be treated as a bit of an opportunity to blood some maybe more domestic players, some younger players coming to the squad. That is perhaps a possibility. We were talking about this going into their game against Saudi Arabia on Tuesday nights. Do they then weaken their squad in that game because they'd already qualified for that as well? Of course, it was a 0-0 draw, but that squad was still selected as a group of players that had to then go on and qualify for the World Cup. So perhaps the squad selection is a little bit weaker when it comes to our turn to play them, but it's really hard to say. I'm not quite sure.
We'll know in a little more time as we head toward that next window in June. And as you say, a big opportunity for Australia to play Japan at home and Saudi Arabia over there. So we'll wait and see how that all shapes up when we get closer. Just quickly on the Asian front, we touched on the Indonesian piece. There was some, pushback from certainly some fans who were calling them, Netherlands B or C. A lot of East Dutch Indies heritage players qualifying for their team. there's probably polarising views on this. Your thoughts? At a headline view, I think the more talented players playing in Asia is just going to uplift what we're playing. And if they've got heritage and they meet the criteria, well, there's not much you can really complain about, because nearly every country's doing that.
Yeah, I think it's specific to the nation, right? Some nations, probably like Australia, will feel pretty comfortable with plucking some players out, like, your Harry Soutars, your Martin Boyles, if they can come in and contribute, and they're not overriding that really core domestic identity of a team. I've only heard a small window, but as you say, some of the conversation from Indonesian fans is that kind of import, nationalized player coming in is starting to become the core characteristic of their Indonesian national team. And if you are going to be a little bit more successful, great, but this is a nation that has hundreds of millions of people in it, and a lot of them are absolutely fanatical for their national team. So how much of that core support are you willing to sacrifice when you kind of lose that connection to your player base, just in terms of some good results? So in terms of pushing the individual nations forward, and in terms of pushing Asia forward, a little bit here and there can help. But I think the individual associations have to be very careful about not pushing it too far.
It certainly comes as a bit of a chicken and the egg, I think, in terms of if we're achieving, then more players might play. But then if they're not seeing players that present and look like the style of football they're playing domestically, it becomes very hard. While we're talking about qualifiers, our friends across the Dutch have qualified. It looked a bit nervy in the first half. Speaking of countries bringing in a few heritage players, New Caledonia put up a fight, and I think they're going to be a team that's going to be on the improve over the next little bit as well. But for the time being, New Zealand are through to the World Cup.
Yeah. 3-0 on paper kind of reads as it should have the whole way. Everyone was expecting New Zealand from the start of qualification to be the team that easily walks through. They win the Nations Cup on almost every occasion, and they've done what they needed to do and earn this qualification spot. You're right, it was a bit nervy. It was 0-0 at half time, and then Chris Wood, who's playing at Nottingham Forest in the Premier League at the moment and absolutely putting on some blinding goal scoring displays, had to be withdrawn through due to injury in the 55th minute when it was still 0-0. So I'm sure at that point there might have just been a few people in the crowd saying, oh no, what is going to happen here? But 3 goals in the end, 3-0. They get the tick mark. They qualify for their 3rd World Cup. Didn't actually lose a game when they last went to a World Cup in 2010 for South Africa. 3 draws, and they finished above Italy in the rankings, which we gave Christian lots of smack for, which was good fun. But New Zealand returned to the international stage. I think it's really cool.
Well, it's going to be great to see. We'll obviously see the return of a number of teams with the expanded World Cup in 2026. We'll probably see some new teams as well, which is really exciting. And clarify, and I'm going to put you on the spot here. For New Caledonia, do they go into repechage or are they done now?
So they do have a chance. So we used to know the intercontinental playoffs. So, for example, last time Australia played, I think it was the UAE in the Asian playoff, and then they went on to play Peru, obviously, in that famous shootout in the intercontinental playoff. And there's a couple of more examples of those games around the world for those final few spots. What's going to happen now with this new 48-team tournament is a number of countries, again, from different associations that have fallen just short of automatic qualification. They're all going to travel, I believe, actually to the host of the World Cup, or maybe it's somewhere else, I'm not sure. Kind of like the old Confederations Cup, and there's going to be a 6-team tournament of which New Caledonia will participate. It's going to be based on FIFA rankings, so they will be on the low end of that scale, obviously. So they'll have to play 2 games. The top 2 teams get a bye to essentially what are the finals. But New Caledonia will have to win twice against near misses from other confederations if they want to make the World Cup, but they are still alive.
I'm sure it'll be challenging, but again, it's great to see. We've seen some players come from France, and also a little tie-in from Australia as well. So we wish New Caledonia all the best. It'll be a wonderful story. While we're still on continental and world football, it would be remiss of us not to talk about Melbourne City's women's team, who are now through to the semi-finals of the AFC Women's Champions League, where they will take on the South Korean team Incheon Red Angels.
Yeah, massive for Melbourne City. A really special occasion on Sunday afternoon as well, it being the first time that Australia had ever hosted a continental women's game of football. there's been a couple of previous iterations of this tournament in terms of the women's club championships. They've always been held overseas. The likes of Sydney FC and Melbourne Victory have participated in that in the past, just kind of on an invitational basis. But now we have the fully fledged Champions League. We had the groups in centralised locations earlier on, which Melbourne City flew through, and then they got to play their one home game at Amy Park, and they're going to go away to another centralised location for the semi-finals and finals. So a little bit unfortunate that an Australian team isn't going to be able to play in front of their home fans just that little bit more, but really cool that they did get at least one opportunity. Credit to the club and the PFA and the A-League. They were all putting their weight behind it, making sure it was well marketed and as well supported as it possibly could be. The girls got the job done. In one of the other ties as well, Ura Red Diamonds were eliminated in a penalty shootout, which is massive. They're a team that should easily be tipped as one of the big competitors, and now they're gone. So Melbourne City not only find themselves on this kind of radical journey for women's football, but with a real opportunity to go and do what no Australian team has even had the opportunity to do before, and that's win a treble in a domestic season. So the Premiership, the Championship, and the Asian Champions League would be pretty cool.
And they could add a real exclamation point with an undefeated regular season yet. So we'll wait and see in the A-League. As we said, they'll take on Incheon on the 21st of May. Both semi-finals will be on the same day. We'll hand it to Jiangda, who won that penalty shootout after 16 penalties. It was almost going to Matilda's levels. They'll take on Ho Chi Minh City from Vietnam. So we wish Melbourne City all the best for that. That will be after the wrap-up of the dub season, so they can turn their focus back to it for the time being. Speaking of the dub, it probably dovetails in quite nicely into having a look at how the dub is shaping up, and 2 full rounds to go. A few teams having some catch-up games still thanks to rescheduled fixtures, Cyclone Alfred, Heat, and some other, actually it's just Cyclone Alfred and Heat now. Their catch-up. So the way it sits at the moment, the top 3 are all locked in that they will finish in the top 3. Still some jostling for positions there. But again, I wouldn't be surprised to see that finish the way it does, 1, 2, and 3. But Melbourne Victory certainly not giving up hope of pipping Melbourne City. They'd love nothing more than a bit of spoiler in that treble you talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. They're pushing really hard. 4 wins in a row, which is slightly better than City. So they're getting a little bit of momentum towards challenging City for that top spot. Massive wins for Western United and Central Coast. Obviously, Western was a little while ago. Now they had a bye, but to get that little win when all those teams that we've been talking about in that middle pack have had such a poor run of form, those wins probably should be enough to see them into finals, which would be massive. And then you got the likes of Brisbane, Canberra, and Wellington, and even Perth, maybe just a slight little chance off the bottom there. Still jostling, still trying to get that one result, the 1 point, maybe the 3 points that is just going to secure them over the line. So, yeah, plenty still to play for in this last 2 games.
Yeah, certainly staying lively. Obviously, Canberra and Wellington both dropping results. We talked about it last week. Wellington versus Central Coast was a huge game because, as you say, almost gets Central Coast in there. You might be lulled into thinking that Brisbane are in a nice spot because they got that game in hand, but you got to remember who that game in hand is against, Lockie.
Yes.
Melbourne City. So that will be a challenging one. Speaking of games taking on, we head into the penultimate round now. As we saw there, 2 to 3 games for every team, and the first of those will have taken place by the time we come to you. It's taking place as we record, essentially. Brisbane taking on Melbourne City. That might be enough for Melbourne City to have, probably 1.5 hands on that trophy if they take all 3 points there. And then the other one that really, there's the next 2 games on that list, Wanderers versus Sydney. If Sydney take 3 points, that's almost going to assign the Wanderers to the wooden spoon after that great run they had a few weeks ago. And then Melbourne and Adelaide fighting out for 2 and 3. So the first 3 games over Wednesday, Friday, and then early Saturday is going to tell us a lot. And then we head into one that could determine a final spot. It could end Perth season. So there's so much on the line this week.
Yeah, and I mean, you got Mariners and the Raw sitting at the bottom there as well. Like that's 5 and 6. Like, it's really cool that everything is so tight and everything is still alive, right? As you say, Brisbane a bit unlucky for that game in hand to be against Melbourne City. Only 3 games away from that undefeated regular season now. But it's going to be a good weekend, as you say. There's so many games that mean so much. Even the likes of the Sydney Derby that's down the bottom of the table. It's like, well, this still means so much because it's a derby and no one wants to be left with the wooden spoon at the end of the season. So absolutely plenty on the line.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. A bit of water to go under that bridge as we watch. We know Melbourne Victory a catch-up game to come as well, which they'll wrap up, which also happens to be against Brisbane. So the bad news for Brisbane is 2 of their last 3 games that they've got to play are against those top 2 teams. So they're going to be really battling, plus a game against Central Coast who are fighting for their final. It's a tough road home for a Brisbane team that showed so much promise earlier in the season, but we'll know much more when we catch up next week. Lockie, let's have a look while we're looking at fixtures. The men's competition resumes after the international break, and again, there's some games here that have got some real meaning to them. Macarthur and Newcastle. Macarthur need to take 3 points to keep any sort of finals hopes alive to kick us off with the weekend.
Yeah, look, after they lost 2 weeks ago now to Western United, I've kind of written them off, Chris. So yeah, you're welcome to hold the optimism for the pair of us if you like. But this game is just a contest between 2 teams that I feel shouldn't be near finals, but a win for one of them is probably going to push them a little bit closer. I don't really give them any chance of doing anything in the postseason, but it's an opportunity to gain points around someone who's close to you on the ladder, right? You've obviously got the original rival, which is the headline on Saturday, which is going to be massive as well.
Yeah, that's a big game again. And when we talk about that finals race, these 2 sides were nipping at the heels of Auckland not that long ago. They're now sitting 5th and 6th. It's a must-win game for these teams. I mean, this game's always a must-win. We know, as you say, it's the original rivalry. It's a huge, clash at any point. Doesn't matter where the teams are sitting on the table. But with the recent form they've had, which has been a bit turbulent for Melbourne and absolutely downright, I don't need to go full Jacob here, but downright disappointing for Adelaide. They haven't won in their last 5. If they can't turn around here, Adelaide could quickly find themselves, depending on other results, sliding out of this finals race. If a Macarthur was to win, Macarthur could be 2 points behind them. Sydney could actually leapfrog them into the 6. They could find themselves, potentially sliding down to a 8th in the next couple of weeks, which is, dire considering it was only a couple of weeks ago when they took on Auckland and had that thrilling 4-4 draw where they came back, where we're talking about, oh wow, they should be locking themselves into 1 and 2.
I think when we finish the regular season and we look back at this game, I think that if there is a loser, I think that team is the one that's going to miss out on finals. Because those top 4 teams, Auckland, Western, Wanderers and City, I'll have a lot more confidence in than this Victory and Adelaide side. And I still believe the quality of Sydney FC is going to pull through and be good enough to at least carry them to a finals position. Whether they can go through the final series from the bottom is another question. But these Victory and United sides have made me worried in the last month. So if there is a winner, that might just mean a finals place. I don't know if that's putting too much pressure on the game when there's still 6 rounds to go, but it certainly feels like it's that kind of level of importance.
Speaking of Sydney, they play Melbourne City. If they can win against Melbourne City and there's any sort of win in that other game, they will actually leapfrog one of those teams. If there's draws, they'll be within one of all 3 of those teams in Victory, City and Adelaide, including having a game up their sleeve on Victory. So a huge opportunity for Sydney as well to really, get themselves into that top 6 for the first time in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, you got to consider the Wanderers who have to travel away, who are also on that 34-point mark with Melbourne City. Wellington have not been in good form recently at all, but travelling to New Zealand is never an easy thing to do. And then there's even Western United who have the bye this week, so they're going to lose a little bit of ground to all the teams behind them. So it's the same. It's the same with the Asian qualifiers. It's the same with the dub. It's the same with the men's competition. It's all so tight, which is really exciting to be at this point in the season. And there's, it does happen a fair bit in the A-League where there's a lot of games that kind of just don't mean anything, but a lot of them are still holding some importance, which is really cool.
They certainly do. The other 2 games, of course, Central Coast and Perth, that holds some importance for Central Coast trying to get out of those Australia Cup playoff berths, Perth to get off the bottom of the ladder, Brisbane likewise, and Auckland obviously to extend their lead at the top. So pretty much every team has something riding on the line as we head into the final few rounds here, which is great to see. And we applaud the APL for some of those things they've put into place, like the FA Cup playoffs, the playoffs they are now, not the FFA Cup, because that has added some more meaning to these places, and we don't have relegation, but that's really exciting. So lots on the line, lots of football. If you want more football and you want to get even more in-depth, and Lockie has done a wonderful job of doing today for us, you can find Lockie and the crew over at Round Ball Australia. For your podcast content, you can find them on YouTube. You can also find Round Ball Australia on the website with the written articles as well, and lots of great in-depth content around the Socceroos, the A-League, the Women's A-League as well. So, Lockie, a big thank you. And last but not least, they can also still buy the jerseys for a limited time. Seen those floating about. If they wanted to get around those, head to the website.
Yeah, head to the website, rambleaustralia.com.au. You'll see them everywhere. You won't be able to miss them. On sale until Tuesday nights, which they'll be gone. So, exciting times.
Excellent. Well, thank you as always, mate. Look forward to catching up with you again next week as this A-League seasons and everything else continues to heat up.
Cheers, Chris. Thank you.
Well, big thanks to Lockie Avil, Mr. Consistent as always. It's time to move from the round ball to the red Sharon or the yellow Sharon if you're under lights. And we welcome back the man, the myth, the legend, the host of the Third Man Up podcast, Brody Burrows. You're back, mate. Feeling refreshed, ready to get into some Aussie rules?
Yeah, mate. Subbed off for a little bit, but ready to crack in and hopefully no cramps.
Oh, hopefully not. And look, we're going to go at a nice surface level today. But of course, if people want to get some real meat and potatoes of this stuff, they can listen to you and the Great Spider on the Third Man Up podcast. You'll be able to find that down below in the notes, of course. But mate, the AFL, we're a couple of weeks in, starting to get into the rhythm of things. Look at that ladder. North Melbourne in the top 8. I'm up and about. I was nearly going to put the theme music behind us, but I thought that might have been a bit much punishment for you. It's been a slow start for your boys.
Oh, mate, absolutely. Fremantle, unfortunately. Tough loss against the Swans. Just come down to... Sydney were actually the better team all day in this one and probably should have converted early and nearly put Fremantle away early in that third quarter, but they left the door open. And I think it just went to show on this one. You had a team who was just... I think they were hitting targets a lot better inside 50, whereas Fremantle's last 10 minutes, they would have went in 5 or 6 times to the same spot, higher and higher and higher, and Sydney cleared it out. And Riley Bice, what a pickup they found here. Mature age recruit has come in, and I think it goes to show that there's so many good players running around in amateur leagues, in country leagues, in VFL, Sandful, Waffle. There's so much mature age talent out there that's ready to come in and make an instant impact in the AFL. So I thought he was the main reason Sydney won this game. He was so composed in that last quarter. But yeah, a very tough start for Fremantle, and Justin Longmuir has got that much pressure on him. I think he's in a bit of trouble.
Yeah, I think there might be a bit of pressure, but anyway, it is very early days. Some teams have only played one game. Look at the Gold Coast Suns, what a percentage, they're flying. But I think the weekend showed us that realistically, the competition is going to be the last 2 weekends. When we look at teams like Richmond, we look at the Geelong and St Kilda result, we look at the North Melbourne result. It really shows us the old adage of if you turn up on the day. I think that's going to be as true as ever this season.
Yeah, we've seen it a lot over the past 2 or 3 years. I think with this one, with the standards so high and everyone's prepped so well now. Sports science is so big in the game, and I think it really goes to show in this one. St Kilda. We can't jump at shadows from 1 week performances. And we saw it last week. Geelong were premiership favourites. St Kilda were going to be bottom 4. North Melbourne were going to be just as bad. North Melbourne come out and do this. Melbourne had their mojo back. And then you can't take the ladder seriously till round 6. Coaches said it on the weekend in press conferences, round 6. And then we're not going to even know finals calculations to round 15 or 16. I mean, look at Fremantle last year. They were top 4 for, I think, 3/4 of the season and missed finals.
Brisbane, on the other hand, who were 13th at one point in the year.
Exactly right, mate. So we need to stop jumping in shadows a little bit as fans and just let the first few rounds play it out, especially when some teams have played 3 games, some teams have played 1. There's a lot of stop-start, especially with the start of the year. So I think we just need to take a bit of a chill pill. I'm a Fremantle supporter, so I'm a little bit wound up at the moment. But, yeah, that just got to sit back and relax a little bit.
I think someone pointed out to me yesterday, when you've got teams and you look at the Gold Coast in 6th and then you look at Richmond in 13th, they're both on equal points, but there's 200 percentage points difference. You can't be taking that seriously.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not, mate. But we did have some absolutely cracking games over the weekend and very well supported as well.
Certainly has been, mate. So from what we've seen, as you said, it's a really small sample size. But who have been the best couple of sides in terms of it? And we know that results don't always tell the full story. Who's impressed you the most? I'm going to assume that Hawthorn's on that list. 3 wins to start the year is, we knew that they were going to be one of the sides in the mix. They've done really well in terms of that transition over the last few years. But who else has I guess, put the numbers on the board or the performance on the deck that you've seen and gone, I think they might be there when the whips get cracking?
Adelaide Crows are the one that just jumps off the page. I mean, they were probably my biggest riser for the year when we did this at the start, and it's all come together for them at the moment. I mean, they subbed Isaac Rankin off at 3/4 time on the weekend, and if that's not a massive flex, then nothing is. He absolutely took the proverbial against this Essendon side. And when you've got Jordan Dawson, you've got Jake Saligo, you've got Isaac Rankin in that midfield now, it's the ability to burst from stoppages, which is probably Crows, that was their main weakness over the last few years. Nothing against having Matt Crouch and Rory Laird, who are big accumulators of the footy. They've now got people who can, really turn clearances into scores. And we've seen it on the weekend. I mean, turnovers is where Crows got really busy. They had over 100 points from turnovers on the weekend. So when they do turn it over, you've got the big three in Walker, Fogarty and Thilthorpe up there. Good luck trying to beat one of those monsters one-on-one. Hawthorn, as we've mentioned, but GWS, they just find ways to win games of football. So I think for me, they're probably the three that have really jumped off the page to me, and the ones who I think will be definitely in the 8 come finals end.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether Isaac Rankin just had a gig to go to, mate. I know he's juggling that around his footy as well. Must be tough. I hate blokes that are that talented, but anyway, that's a whole other story.
Yep.
If you don't know what we're talking about, check out his Instagram. He can play some tunes. The great man, he's killing it in multiple avenues of life. What about the performers that have disappointed you? Undoubtedly, you're thinking about that one over your shoulder, but let's not get too personal. Is there anyone that I guess is, and we can roll this into the double up of biggest surprises too, if there's anyone that surprised you from a negative point of view in the early parts?
Yeah, so I expected Essendon to be bottom 4, so they haven't really surprised me. I just don't think their list is there to where they probably thought it was. They just don't have the talent on the list. But look, Carlton and Fremantle are undoubtedly the biggest losers from the opening few rounds here. Carlton at the moment, we've always known Carlton's top 6 is some of the best in the AFL. But they have probably one of the weakest bottom 6 in the competition, and in elite football, that gets found out super quickly. When you've got people who probably should be playing VFL up against a real even team like a Hawthorn on the weekend. Yes, they got the jump, but Hawthorn just went to another gear in that second half. And once they clicked into gear, the game was over. I think them losing a few, of those fringe players from last year, like Kennedy, who went to the Bulldogs and was actually he's been really impressive in the opening rounds. I think that I don't see him making finals from here. Fremantle, they have that talented list. I think they're a more even list than Carlton. But, I mean, going 0-2, yes, Brisbane were at that stage last year. But, yeah, look, they've got a lot of work to do, especially with their travel schedule. They're travelling every second weekend on a long flight. So it's a long way back for both of those clubs, but they do have the list that can rebound.
Yeah, I'm certainly interested from I guess, worst performances point of view. We've seen a good performance and a bad performance from these two sides, and that's Richmond. We knew that they weren't going to be all that strong, but Port Adelaide as well. Like we've seen, I think, the best of Port and the worst of Port, and obviously the best of Port was against the worst of Richmond so far.
Yeah, I think the line in this one was 40+, and it was always going to be that. Like, Port Adelaide come out, and you knew it wasn't a bring your mouth guard to training, but you knew Port Adelaide were going to rock up for this one. And you think this is a lot of those Richmond young players' first interstate trip as well. I mean, this was always on the card for me. I mean, a 72-point win. Port did what they needed to do. If Port lost this one, I tell you what, Kenny Hankley might not still be the coach of Port Adelaide. But I think, Port Adelaide, they're still that team. You don't know what you're going to get from them. I mean, let's not forget they're still without probably their best player in Zach Butters, who will probably be out to about round 5 or round 6. So when Zach Butters gets back, that's just going to completely free up Port's midfield even more. So they do need a lot more help down back. Jeremy Finlayson was the only out from that team that got absolutely monstered by Geelong. But yeah, I think, yes, that they kept Richmond to 50, 60 points on the weekend, but you can't be taking that into next week. They need just a lot more help down back.
They certainly do. We'll wait and see how it all plays out there. I think the one for me, and probably not just a surprise, but I was just impressed. Admittedly, we've only seen one game from them, and it was the Gold Coast Suns. We knew that they'd signed well. Some of the names they've put into that team. Again, people will say they only played against West Coast. We know that West Coast are tipped to be in the doldrums a little bit, but I think in terms of what we've seen from them, and we'll get another look at them this week, but I don't think, again, it's going to be, if you look at their draw over the next couple of weeks, we're not really going to get probably a good look at them until round 4 when they take on Adelaide. But it'll be interesting to see how they build towards that game, because I think that clash is going to be a good test for both those sides.
Yeah, it will be. And I mean, obviously, Gold Coast, they play 3 games at home till round 12. So compared to last year, if they can get through and be 6-6, I think it sets them up to make finals. So obviously a big game here away from home. They only won 3 games away from home last year. If they can go 2-0 away from home to start the year, I think that's a big step in the right direction for them to make finals. But I thought you were going to bring up North Melbourne, mate. Join in the chorus, sing it 1 and all. They're back.
They are back. Caleb Daniel and a few others absolutely on fire. First time in over a decade I've managed to see my team win a game live. I squeezed it in between a couple of other work commitments, which is wonderful. I deliberately went there on my own because I didn't have high hopes, and I didn't want some of my colleagues and friends seeing me either abusing umpires or crying. But I was crying tears of joy. I'm going to be honest, I was confused and lost after that fourth quarter. It was in the balance, and geez, they put on a show. Cherry did a great job against Maxi Gawn in the second half, and yeah, I think those couple of mature age players that have come in, Darling, Parker was a little quieter than I probably would have liked, but Daniel as well. They've added that bit of polish and experience that we didn't have last year to get across the line, and instead of fading and not getting across the line, we absolutely just fired on in the fourth quarter. I will say Melbourne probably helped our cause, and I'm very interested to see how they back up this week. And to that point, that's where I was sort of referencing that the Gold Coast do come down to Melbourne, and yeah, we'll see how that goes. On the Gold Coast, quickly going back to, mate, as much as I'd like to talk about the Shinboners all day long, they've also got that extra game to squeeze in, right, because of old Alfie, who didn't turn up, but threatened to. So, yeah, they've got to squeeze in that extra game against Essendon, but, they can probably put their reserves team out there. It'll be fine.
Absolutely, mate. Well said.
Let's have a look at round 3.
Yeah.
And have a look at that. And Essendon versus Port Adelaide. We talked about Port Adelaide and seeing what they've got. That's a must-win for Port.
I think, you see a very similar score to what you saw from Port Adelaide last week. Port Adelaide are a side when they get rolling, and they're very similar to Adelaide. Must be a South Australian thing, but when they get going, they can pile on scores very, very quickly. We saw that last week. We've seen it the last few years. Their midfielders get forward, especially. They don't have the key forwards who's going to come back and kick you a 7 or an 8 like a Carlton. But the midfielders get forward. You have Jason Horne-Francis, you have Connor Rosie, Zach Butters when he's playing, and then the half-backs can roll through. Kane Farrell, he's playing in that Dan Houston role from last year. So, look, I think Port Adelaide's got far too much talent. I think Willem Drew will go straight to Zach Merritt and just put the clamps on him. Zach Merritt, we've got to touch on that. 4 goals, 36 possessions last week in a losing team. So he must be just thinking, what else can I do in this side? But I see Willem Drew putting on a hard tag, which is what he does best in this one, to Zach Merritt.
I think unless Zach Merritt can clone himself, he can't do much more than that. I'm going to brush over Melbourne and the Gold Coast. Brisbane and Geelong. I feel like we haven't quite seen Brisbane get into their stride yet. They've done enough to win games. They weren't impressive against West Coast. West Coast were mixing it with them early. They just got home in the first game, or what ended up being their first game against Sydney. Geelong, we know what happened on the weekend. They're going to be absolutely fired up. I think this one's going to be an absolute cracker on Saturday night. Yeah, it will.
Look, Geelong always respond to either an upset loss or a big loss. We've seen that time and time again, but going up to the Gabba, one of the hardest tasks in football against the reigning premiers. Admittedly, Brisbane haven't been at their best to start the season, but as good teams do, they find ways to win, and that's what Brisbane have done these last few weeks. Lachie Neale, 10 possessions in the first game, replied last week, 35 and a goal. Bailey Smith are laid out. I think he really hurt Geelong. We saw how important he was against Port Adelaide. Geelong's midfield, they tagged Max Holmes, who's probably their key link man in breaking lines, the ability to run. Without Bailey Smith, they just look like they didn't have the pace to go with St Kilda, which just seems weird to say when Jack McRae just racked it up at will. Kane Corns wouldn't have him in his anywhere near the midfield, he said the week before. But yeah, look, I think Bailey Smith comes back in there. This one is a real 50-50 game. I think you'll come out and you'll see a Port Adelaide-like response from Geelong this weekend. I'm actually going with the Cats away from home in this one.
Yeah, I don't mind them either. I think there's some interesting games, as we said, this weekend. I think Geelong will be bouncing back for that one. The other couple I wanted to talk about here, let's have a look at Friday night as well. Carlton and the Bulldogs, both teams with points to prove. Equally, St Kilda and Richmond, we've seen some shocks from these two teams, but How do you see these two shaping up? Couple of Victorian derbies, which we haven't seen a lot of in the opening rounds. These are games that are important probably for different reasons in the context of these 4-team seasons.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting seeing Carlton and the Bulldogs go up against each other. We saw Sam Darcy. I thought he was unlucky to, kick 6 or 7 last week. I thought he got his arms chopped a lot and got absolutely nothing for it. Against the Pies, Carlton, on the other hand, they just need to maintain a 4-quarter effort. We're seeing glimpses, we're seeing parts of quarters, but it's just not enough at the moment. And they've got a really tough start to the season. I mean, next round, they play Collingwood at the G. After that, it's West Coast. Then it's North Melbourne, and it's completely different North Melbourne. After that, it's Crows at the Adelaide Oval. I mean, they're in danger. If they win this, they could be 1-6 or 1-7 by round 9 or 10. So this is such an important game, not just for this round, but for the rest of their season. Because Western Bulldogs, I think they're both in that maybe 8 to 12 bracket. I don't see Western Bulldogs as a definite top 8 yet team, but I see them both in that 8 to 12 bracket. So I think this is one of those 8-point games you'll see early in the season. I'm tipping a response from Carlton, just because if it doesn't happen now, I don't see it happening over the next probably 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah, I agree with you. If they can't turn it around now, what's that old line? If not now, when?
Yes. Yeah.
St Kilda and Richmond, as we said, different. For St Kilda, I think it's very much a case of here's a chance to prove themselves and say, well, we are able to be a consistent team and not just spring the occasional upset and then miss the finals or drift, into that mid-table malaise. For Richmond, we saw what they did in round 1. They went back to earth last week. This is a chance to show that they're more the round 1 team than they are the round 2 team. And it's not necessarily about the 4 points here for them. I think it's just about a 4-quarter effort.
Yeah, it is. And you often see with these young sides, we saw it with Gold Coast, GWS, when they first come into the competition. If someone gets a jump on them early, it ends up messy for the whole game. But when these young players, they get a bit of energy around them, a bit of momentum, they can be really hard to stop because they play with that youthful exuberance. They do things that they probably shouldn't be doing, that catch teams unaware. They get out the back, they get goal side of their opponents. So if Richmond can, I think they need to come out and they need to be within a goal at quarter time. Otherwise, if St Kilda do get the jump on them, I see a similar scoreline to what Port Adelaide did to Richmond last week.
I'll wait and see on that one. We'll leave the what I'm calling the match of the round on Saturday night to last, and we'll head to the Western Derby, mate. What's happening here? You only won 1 out of 2 last year. You've got the trophy at the moment, Fremantle. Is there any nerves based on what you've put out so far? And the fact that West Coast probably showed some glimpses last weekend, even if it wasn't 4 quarters, this one's just not going to be handed to you. We know they'll be up and about for it. Yeah,
look, blockbuster derby, isn't it? 17th versus 18th, mate. Could be a nil or draw here. No, that pains me to say as a Fremantle supporter. Look, Fremantle, this is their time to come out there and make a statement and say, all this preseason talk about us being contenders is true. We haven't played our best footy, but they have to come out and make a real statement this weekend. They're really missing Hayden Young at the moment. They're so with their ball distribution. It's get the ball, kick it long, get the ball, kick it long. Josh Tracy's battling away up there. Jai Amos isn't the guy who's going to be leaping over packs. He's a lead up forward. And Shai Bolton played last week. He looked like he's still trying to work out structures, work out timings, work out his runs. West Coast, similar to last year, if they get a lead early, similar to Richmond, they can put the foot down. We saw Harley Reid nearly best on ground in his first ever derby last year. But look, I think Fremantle will come out with a point to prove this weekend. They let one slip against Sydney last week. And I think, I think 40 plus points in this one to the Dockers.
I'm actually going to tip. I think that this might be Fremantle's biggest ever win. If my little bit of, again, very, very amateur research is correct, I think their biggest win was back in about 2006, 57 points. They managed to knock off West Coast by. So I wouldn't be surprised. We saw in a couple of games last week that teams could really get away from teams. And again, you touch on that sort of inexperience that, and West Coast have got a bit of that as well. We know there's a few dramas in the camp. If Fremantle can start to break away from them and break their spirit in the sort of third quarter, they could quite easily run up a tally here. So I'm going to go Freo to win this by 10 goals. So basically what's just happened is West Coast have just been guaranteed to win.
Yeah, mate. Thanks for that. Really appreciate you doing that for me. Really nice. But I'm going to go Shai Bolton to turn it on, and in his first ever derby to win the Ross Glendinning medal.
I like it, mate. I like it a lot. Let's head to the match of the round. Hawthorn, GWS. It's at the opposite end of the table. It's 1v3. These are two of the sides that have certainly been tipped to be there. It's the Pooh Brown and the Wee Yellow up against the Orange Tsunami. I'm not sure who wins out in that choice of horrible colours.
Definitely not. But yeah, played down in Tassie. It's you don't want to say it's disappointing that it's played down in Tassie, but it absolutely is. I mean, imagine this at the MCG on Saturday night. They would get a pretty big crowd there, I think. But unfortunately, yeah, down there in Tassie, and both teams, they do all right down there. When GWS have gone down there before, they've actually got a pretty good record, and we know what Hawthorn's like down there too. But look, I'll look at this one, and it's going to come down to the midfield. I mean, Lloyd Meek in the ruck's been superb for them all year. Will Day, Josh Ward, I thought he really impressed me last week. And then we know what you're going to get week in, week out from John Newcomb, who's just a competitive beast. But then you look at the Giants, you got Finn Callahan, who's well and truly proved he was worth the $17 million the Saints were offering him over 10 years. You've got Josh Kelly, you've got Cornelio. They've just got so many players who can run through the midfield. I'm going to go with the Giants in this one.
Yeah, I think the Giants are going to be strong. I think it's an absolute cracker. I think Hawthorn, and we talked with Matt Willoughby before about the NRL, and I think the AFL is going to be a little bit like this. I think it's going to be hard for teams to string together more than sort of 4 or 5 wins too often. Even 3 wins is going to be a good stint, and there's going to be a lot of teams that will win 3, lose 1, win 2, lose 1, win 3, sort of those top teams, I think. And I think this is the loss for Hawthorn. We've seen some really good performances so far, but it'll be interesting. And hopefully, York Park, as I think it's properly known, or UTAS Stadium, they've only sort of seen crowds of 16,000, 17,000 in recent years. They've got a capacity of 19. Come on, Lonnie, do us right here. This is an absolute crack. You got it in your backyard. It'd be great to have it at the MCG, but just show, why the Tassie Devils are going to be a success, and get those 19,000 fans packed in there. Get there, get behind one team, the other team, or just football in general, and show us what Tassie's going to deliver once the Tassie Devils come in. I think that'd be great to see.
Yeah, do you reckon any of the Tassie Devils staff members might be having a few meetings with a few players this weekend, just seeing what they're up to?
Rude not to, mate. Show some boys some hospitality. The finest sights of Launceston, both of them.
Won't take them long.
Right, we've just been banned from Tasmania.
They like a good sausage, mate. They're inbred.
Hopefully, the Tassie Devils are not looking for a ground announcer or media provider. Out of a job, but look, if they are, we'll do anything for the right price. Not sure how our wives would feel moving to new stadium. We'll figure it out. They've got a Cadbury factory. The girls will be happy.
Yeah, chocolate and wine. They've got a lot of little wineries down there, mate. I'm sure we'll be fine.
They certainly do, mate. It's going to be an interesting round. We'll have a look at how it all shapes up and see what comes of it, and we'll catch up again in a couple of weeks. Break down the AFL at detailed levels, but we'll, at the minimum, have a chat next week in around the grounds and see where we stand and who's on top of this ladder, because there's some red-hot performers and some not-so-red-hot performers. And if you're looking where to find those not-so-red-hot performers, just look over Brody's right shoulder.
Yep, and hopefully that's still there this week and not in the microwave.
Yeah. I was going to say it might have been firewood, but it's a bit warm for that at this time of year. But anyway, mate, a big thank you to you as always. And if people want to get some more in-depth and, someone who's actually going to talk, well, I was going to say some sense, but I'm not sure that that's the exact description of what Spider brings to your podcast. But some actual intimate knowledge of AFL at a playing level, then tune into the Third Man Up podcast and catch yourself and Spider talking lots of footy and related topics, mate.
Yeah, plenty of other related topics on that too.
Well, another big episode in the books, covering off all the black and white of your sporting landscape. No grey opinions here. A big thank you to all of our guests. The ever-reliable man on the ones and twos, JR, our producer, coming in, pinch hitting with all things Queensland and all things motorsport, covering off the Olympics as well in around the grounds, which was great to see. Brody Burrows from the Third Man Up podcast, giving you your dose of AFL and wrapping all of that, as well as helping us out with around the ground as well. Matt Willoughby on debut, the Rugby League maestro, coming in and pinch hitting and giving us an update on where the NRL is up to. And of course, Mr. Consistent, Lachie Avil from Round Ball Australia, giving you all of your football updates around the A-League, the Socceroos, and much, much more. If you want to stay up to date with us throughout the week in between episodes, of course, you can find us on our social media channels. You can find us on TikTok, Instagram, X, and on Facebook. Just search for The Chris Mack Show. That is our handle on all of the channels and where you can find us to get plenty more updates of what's happening around your sporting world. And of course, our main home, YouTube. You can find us here each and every Thursday, keeping you up to date with what's happening in the sporting world. Make sure to subscribe, hit the bell down below as well, so you get some updates each time we do drop a video or an episode. And of course, if you want to listen on the go with a bit of audio, you can find us on Spotify as well. Again, searching for The Chris Macpherson Show. A big thank you for tuning in. Look forward to bringing you another huge dose of sport next Thursday. But until then, enjoy your sporting week.